In the last video, I presented what I considered to be a potential bug in the input handling in MSBASIC for the 6502. So this time we're going to explore that, and I want to figure out what is actually happening. So I've got MSBASIC running in the emulator this time, in MESN, and we're going to find out what happens. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to open up the debugger. Right, so I've got my debugger here, and we've got our debugger window here. Okay, so let's start this. Let's run. I'm going to input a name, and we're ready to trigger this input event. So what we want to do, we know it happens on the input, and we know there's a subroutine that is called to get input. So let's have a look at that, shall we? So we'll scroll up. It's going to be up here. Got our read family keyboard routine. So I built MSBASIC with all the debugging output. So when I've loaded it up in this debugger, you can see it's got all the comments that are in the code and all the labels. So we can find where we want to look very easily. Keyboard in it, here we are. MonRead key. MonRead key is the subroutine that the MSBASIC calls to read from the keyboard. So what we'll do is we'll put a breakpoint here at the end of MonRead key. And then I'll press enter. And we can see that the emulator stopped. And we are stopped here in the debugger. Right. So now we can step through each instruction by pressing F11. So go to here, we can see the MonRead key is called from getLN, getLine. It checks to see if the A register, which we can see A register has OD in it, which is the key code for carriage return for enter. Checks to see if it's OF. If it's not equal to F, then it branches down to an RTS, and we can see that getLN is called in this inline 2. Right, so what it's going to do, it does a compare with 07, which it's not 07 of course, so OD, and then it compares with OD. So we've got to check here to look for the carriage return. The enter is going to branch down here to L2453. We'll step down to that, which then does a jump to L29 B9, which will load Y with 0. It will load a 0 into Y. Now it's going to store that Y at address 16, which I believe is the input buffer, and it uses an offset of X. Now because nothing has been put into the input buffer yet, X you can see here is 0, so address 16 will get the value of 0 because Y is currently 0. You'll see that over here. Will update 16, will update to 0 in a second. Let's over there. Yep, there we go. The address 16 is now 0, and it's going to load X with the value of 15. 15 hex, and then it loads OD back into the A register and stores A into 11. It stores that OD into address 11, and then we're jumping into outdo. And so this is the output routine, right? You see it calls down here, calls moncout. And this is quite a long routine really, so which will probably go through a a VB wait. So what we'll do is we'll go down to the bottom here to this RTS and we'll make another breakpoint. You can press F5 and we'll jump to the next breakpoint. Let's see, we hit that that RTS there, and we come back from this outdo, restoring values, go back from the RTS, and that loads an OA, and it's going to do another one. So this was I think what was it, carriage return and line feed. It's sending carriage return and line feed values to the output, which most displays need in order to actually move the cursor to the beginning of the line on the next line. So we come back, go into outdo again, right, which will go into monc out, and then we can jump to the end of the monc out again, and then we come back, and then there's an RTS here, right, and so here we are. We've come out of this RTS, we've found something already quite interestingly named here. So it's going to load into the A register from address 16 hex, and that was 00, right? When just before it stored 0 into 16 with an offset of x, and now it's loading that first byte out of the input buffer. And here we have a branch not equal. So if it's not equal to 0, it will branch to L2ABE, but it is equal to 0. And this is, it's equal to 0 because it's using a null termination for input. Right? When you press enter, it puts a 0, a hexadecimal 0, into the last slot in the input buffer to show when you get to the end of the input buffer. So what's happening here is that you get that 0 hex value at the beginning of the input buffer, and this here does a check to see if that's 0 at the beginning of the input buffer, and it's going to fall through here into this jump to control C typed. That's going to do much what you think it's going to do, right? Control C was typed, and so it's going to it's going to do a stop. It's the same thing as up here, right? When you control C during output, this routine runs. Though it does not print the line, which is sort of interesting. See, it jumps over the print error line num, but it does jump to restart. It's very interesting that it does that. So let's have a look-see. I guess we can just keep going from now because it's going to jump to restart, which is basically just starting up the thing again. Right, the output's there. Let's turn off these breakpoints again and just keep running, and we get the OK. So that's what is going on here. It's a very odd thing that's going on, really. Let's go back and have a look at that, shall we? I'm going to go back to it. Let's prepare things, shall we? We'll run again. Hi. Let's get these breakpoints back. I should have done this before, but I hit that, go like this, I believe. Now here we are, yep. So, what's one thing we could do to sort of fix this? Well, one thing I have checked is that this jump to Control C typed, we could change that to here. We jump to input error. We're to jump to input error here. we'll get the same error output as if we typed the wrong input. It would say redo input. But that's if this is actually an error. So I want to work out if this is really a bug or if it's intended behavior. And to do so, I'm going to have to look at other examples of MSBASIC, BASIC in general, and some documentation. So let's have a look at that next. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check on another system. I'm going to use MSBASIC on another system. I'm going to see if we see the same behavior. So I've got this test program here on a this is a Sim1 emulator called Simulator, which is running MSBASIC built for the Sim1. And I've got this sample program here which takes an input and then it prints that input squared and then ends. And we're going to see if the same behavior occurs, right? So we run it. We have a prompt. If I just press enter, we come up OK, right? It doesn't print what it should do. It should be like this. If I give it a 9, it'll go 9 squared is 81. If I give it a letter, it gives me redo from start. If I give it nothing, it just ends. So we have the same behavior on the Sim1. So it's not my build which is uniquely affected. But is this normal behavior in BASIC itself? To check this, I'm going to use this Apple I emulator where I have the same program. So we're going to run this, right? If I give it a number, we get 8 squared is 64. Run that again. If I give it a letter, we get syntax error, retype line. So the error is different, right? This isn't MSBASIC on here. This is Applesoft's BASIC. And if I don't put anything in, we get the same error. So Apple BASIC at least has different behavior to MSBASIC. Now that we've worked that out, the question is this documented behavior? Is it documented and expected that we should end, right, we should exit out if we press enter with no input? So first let's have a look at the MSBASIC manual. I've got this PDF here of MSBASIC. This is copyright 1983 by Victor and 1979 by Microsoft. So the version of MSBASIC that I've got built, remember correctly, is 1977. So this manual is a little bit later than the build that I have. But that MSBASIC, depending on its version, right, depending on what you build it for, you will get the patches all the way up until like 1980. So it's kind of covering this. So what are we going to do? We're going to look for the input. Here we are. The input expression statement command, right? Line 37 on page 37. Scroll down here a bit. Where are we up to? 37. Here we are. So input, when input statement is encountered, pauses waiting for data. It will print a string beforehand. Does enter the terminal. Comma can be used if nothing there. Does not echo a carriage return. Data is entered as assigned to variable given in the variable list. The number of data items supplied must be the same as the number of variables in the list. Now that there seems to be, state that you must enter data, right? The variable names in the list, numeric values, including names, subscription values, the type of data that is input must agree with the type specified in the variable name. Right? If it has a $sign on the end, it's a string. If it doesn't have a $sign, and here you can see my program that I used. Responding to an input with too many or too few items, or with the wrong type of value, numeric instead of string, causes the message redo from start to be printed. No assignment of input values is made until acceptable response is given. And then we get to this input hash. So there's no explicit explanation of what happens if you enter no data. But what it does say is that if you respond with too few items or with the wrong type of value, it causes a message redo from start. So that does suggest to me that the expected behavior, if you press enter without inputting any data, would be to print the error message. But that's not the whole story, unfortunately, because I was a little bit suspicious of that 1979 copyright. And so I went looking for another manual, an older manual if I could. And I found one for the Kim 1 Basic we've got here. Right, and this one, it seems to be from 1979. And this one, it seems to be from 1977. We see here that this image of the cassette that it was sold on, MOS Technology 6502, 9-digit basic by Microsoft, copyright 1977. I don't think there's an explicit date, although there is shown over here, copyright 1977 by Microsoft Co. On this manual, but if I make my way down to the dictionary, I think it's called a dictionary here. We make our way down here to input. I'll bring up this, shall we? We have a little bit down here, where it says, if carriage return is typed to an input statement, BASIC returns to command mode. Typing cont after an input command has been interrupted will cause execution to resume at the input statement. Right? So, what that means, that if I write cont now, we end up back inside the program. So it does appear to be an expected behavior. But where is this information in the newer manual? We can even bring up the emulator again. Let's get rid of those breakpoints. Bring up the emulator again. Oh, and then move it up to the top. Right. So we've got our emulator here back again. Here we are. Let's run our program again. I'll call myself bit growers. I don't enter anything in the bit. Cont. And we're back to bit. So yes, it does seem to be an expected behavior that at some point became undocumented. Cont. Oh. And we're back in here again. Right? So, what happened to it? Why did it go missing from the documentation? And I think there's actually, let's go back again. If we go back again, right? Let's look for cont. Let's have a look what Cont has. Here we are, right? Execution resumes at the point where the break occurred. If break occurred after a prompt from an input statement, execution continues with the reprinting of the prompt, right? So that basically describes what happens. But this is like, this behavior is missing from the input description, which is very weird. I mean, it doesn't explicitly state that if you press enter carriage return on an input statement that it will break out, but it is describing that you'll go back into the program when you do that. There's actually even one more that I found in here which seems to suggest the behavior as well. And that was with the line input. Which one was it? There's this one here. Here we are. A line input may be bypassed by typing Alt-C. MSBASIC will return to the command line and type OK. So that's what happens with this, right? It returns to the command line and types OK. And then typing cont returns the execution at the line input. So it seems that what I discovered was intended behavior that became undocumented. So then the question becomes, why implement it like this? You can already check if the input is a Control-C, right? You could, when a Control-C is entered at an input statement, you could just break out, rather than breaking out on a null input. And that's the real question. Why did they choose to do it like this? But I guess in the end, this is software that is now 50, almost 50 years old. Is there a reason to patch it now? Or would it be better to modify the documentation to make this behavior clear, so that anyone else who's playing around with it now doesn't fall into this trap without understanding what's going on? So I guess I'm putting this out there so that anyone who finds this behavior now has a reference point to what is happening, and that it is actually expected behavior and how to recover from it. And I guess that's where I'll end this video. Thank you for joining me on this little adventure, and hopefully I'll be back again with something new. Until then.